All right. We have on Carnivore JT. He's big on Instagram now. You started off being big on Twitter, and then your Instagram just blew up. I started following you. I posted a video about carnivore for athletes, and I was like, yeah, fucking no. And then people started tagging you in the video. I'm like, who the fuck is this? So I look at the Carnivore JT. I was like, oh, nice. I like this. So I followed you, and I think I might have reached out instantly, like, yo, let's get you on the podcast, and I wanna hear what you have to say. So, bro, I'm pumped to have you on, man. Really appreciate you giving us your time, and it will be I hope to learn a lot of shit from you today.
I appreciate you guys having me on. I understand the challenges of getting people scheduled onto podcasts more than most people.
Yeah, you have a podcast as well, right? I've listened to a few episodes of yours.
Yes. Yeah, I had about a 4 month break in between season one and season two. And it was by design, because I knew I was going to go after basically all the heavy hitter carnivores in the space. And I wanted to upgrade my equipment. And I understand how much like work it does. And I don't want to say I'm a perfectionist, but I don't like putting out a subpar product, especially if I'm going to get people, that are the busiest of the busy, right? It's one thing to just get people like me, right? Like it's like no big deal. But when you have, MDs and surgeons and authors and professors and all of that, like you want to be respectful of their time. And so it took me a while to get season two going, but then I just cranked out I think I have about 20 episodes in the last month to give a nice backlog. And so, yeah, I full into season two, and I got all the heavy hitter carnivore doctors airing in January.
That's awesome. Did you get Baker on yet?
Yeah, so Baker will be Friday. So the January lineup is Baker this on the 3rd, which is the first Friday of January. Ken Berry's on the 10th. Anthony Chafee's on the 17th. Robert Kiltz is on the 24th, and then Philip Ovadia is on the 31st. All MDs.
Okay, so you talked to all them. We had Baker on 2 years ago, and man, I fucking love him. He's awesome, and he's pragmatic. You know what I mean? Like he's not a zealot. It's like, hey, yeah, this just seems to make sense. You know what I mean? Like, and all his arguments against what people are fighting him on is like, well, it's literally their argument back at them, because it's everyone has their own bullshit studies that they can cite. You know what I mean? Every single person, you could find a study to cite anything, and that's why I think a lot of this comes down to, and to top it off, we don't even know what really matters and what doesn't. Um, it comes down to, how are you responding? How do you feel? And for me personally, right, when I do carnivore, I feel fucking great. My resting heart rate's a little high. My sleep is good. My energy is cognitively phenomenal. I can eat as much as I fucking want. As long as I'm doing the dairy free, like true 100% carnivore, bro, I eat and eat and eat and eat, and I just don't gain weight. I keep shredding down. The only downside that I've personally had from it is, man, I can't do high volume. My volume just shits the bed. It really sucks. And even when I introduced cheese to it, any kind of dairy, volume just wasn't there. I was a little exhausted, but I looked great. I felt great, and I was still strong. So like, I don't give a shit, but that's why I don't recommend it for my athletes. Um, Question for you, APOB. You had all these guys on. The only ass kicker I've seen from the carnivore is like the APOB argument. Talk to me about that. What did you learn in interviewing these guys? I assume you talked about it.
Yeah, so the cholesterol thing's an interesting one. I like to look at nutrition as like you said, we don't know a ton. One of the smartest people I know in the entire space is a Nick Norwitz. I don't know if either of you guys are familiar with him. One of the most educated people you could possibly be. First of all, he was a valedictorian at a Dartmouth, so an Ivy League school. Has a PhD in nutrition metabolism from Oxford, and is finishing up his MD at Harvard. And if one of these smartest guys that I know, like he's a published author, he's a published, researcher, And his whole slogan is stay curious. Like that's his tagline. And his whole thing is we don't know a ton. So we should just keep trying to find out as much as we can, which completely goes against what everybody tells you. They're like, no, we know that cholesterol causes heart disease, right? Like we know that. I'm like, okay, well, we can look to the origins of where that came from. Where did it come from? It came from flawed studies back in the 60s, right? It all originated back in the 60s where we started demonizing saturated fat instead of sugar. Now you can go to the conspiracy theory route and you can look up how they paid Harvard scientists to push the narrative and Big Sugar had their hand in these studies and all that kind of stuff. But what really strikes me is, so I was talking to Dr. Philip Ovadia, who's a cardiac surgeon, might know a thing or two. And he was telling me back in 2000 when he was graduating or he was finishing up his residency and you have to pick your specialty, right? And he was telling his mentor, he's like, I think I'm going to go cardiac surgery. I think that's the route that I'm being drawn to. And the guy goes, don't do that. He's like, that's a dead field. It's like, we've solved heart disease. So in 2000, this is when statins are coming out, right? He's like, we have statins. There will not be heart disease. You are picking a field that is dead, right? Like it's somebody going into print advertising in the day of the internet, right? And he's like, don't do it. Well, he decided to do it anyway. And guess what? We have not solved heart disease. And so you start looking at all these things and then you go, okay, well, is it really LDL? And Nick Norwitz's famous line that I quote from him all the time, LDL is causal, but it is not sufficient, right? Like you will see LDL in heart disease. You open up plaque, you're going to see LDL, but it is not the sole reason. And so then you start looking at studies that show populations with the higher amounts of LDL live longer. You're like, okay, well, that doesn't quite fit the narrative. And then you just keep going further on, and you realize that we do a test from the 60s, right? Like your total cholesterol. You test your triglycerides, you test your HDL, you test your LDL. First of all, the LDL is not actually a direct measurement. I don't know if most people are aware of this. It's an equation where they don't actually directly test your LDL, which can be a problem, especially when you're in a low carb. My direct LDL measurements are about 20% lower than my estimated, which if you then go into papers on how important LDL is, that's like a 30% increase in heart disease, right? So you're like, okay, well, we just continue to have problems here. Then you look at some of the research showing that the HDL triglyceride ratio is a better indicator of heart disease than LDL. And then you go, okay, well, now if this is a common thread on carnivore, LDL goes up, HDL goes up, triglycerides go down. So I am now limiting my risk of heart disease and all of these other factors, except for LDL. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, right? So then you just go back and forth. And the explanation that I like best as to why it specifically happens when people go low carb, high fat is the lipid energy model. Essentially, it's complex, but essentially, I am now transferring from carbohydrates to fats as my fuel. Fats are not water soluble. They need a carrier in my bloodstream. And guess what carries fats? Yep. My lipoproteins. Yep. So it would make sense that my LDL goes up in order to carry this fuel that have now switched.
Readily available fuel. Yep.
Readily available, right? And
blood sugar. Yep.
And when I continue to do stuff on my own and I continue to look at it, I really start to question if this is what we need to hone into when I can manipulate it drastically, right? Like I did an experiment to see what would happen if I went 4,000 calories of carnivore and then 4,000 calories of the standard American diet. And when I did the standard American diet, 4,000 calories was just garbage. I was eating 500 grams of carbs, like Pop-Tarts, Twinkies, like just nonsense. And my LDL went down 70%. So I'm like, and there's actually a protocol. It's Dave Feldman. He's a researcher does a ton of these experiments. And it's called the Feldman protocol. And you basically just eat a whole bunch of processed garbage carbohydrates the week before your blood tests, and your LDL will absolutely crash. And so you're like, okay, if that's what I'm truly looking at, and if that is the number one thing that I need to look at, it stands to reason that you're suggesting the standard American diet is healthier than carnivore, right? Like, come on, like we have to be real about this at some point.
And your A1C, because it's a history of your 3 month. So if you ever want to cheat, the insurance blood tests and get a lower, so then your A1C, which is 3 months of blood sugar, the average of 3 months, that'll still be low because even with the tons of sugar you're eating for a week, it doesn't. That's awesome. What a great move. So like at least you know how to cheat the system with that.
Right. And so that makes me like, and I look at it and I go, okay, if something that's that easily manipulated, that can't be our sole cause, right? And then the thing you go back to, and the more and more medical professionals you talk to, the literature that's out there as well, insulin resistance is a bigger thing to pay attention to, a bigger cause, a bigger risk factor for all of this stuff. And so if my diet is improving insulin resistance, and it's improving my HbA1c, and it's improving my glucose levels, and it's improving my HDL, and it's improving my triglycerides, and my inflammation is going down, and my C-reactive protein levels, and on and on and on and on and on, but my LDL elevates, and I have a plausible explanation as to why, I'm okay with that.
Jason, how long have you been doing this? Because you said you spoke to this doctor back in 2000s when he was finishing his residency. So have you been flirting with this since back then?
No, so he was telling me a story. So I interviewed him about 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me his story on how he ended up at cardiac surgery. So I've been doing this 2.5 years now.
So I'm with you. I think triglycerides are a bigger killer than any, which I mean, that's all sugar related. You know, it all stems from the sugar. And all I personally care about, I care about my personal health, but I tell my athletes all the time, elite performance and health really don't go hand in hand. They're two different things. They are two different things. And what it takes for you to be very, very good at sports, or let's look at bodybuilding. What does it take to be an elite bodybuilder? The most unhealthy that you'll probably be to step on that Olympia stage. You know what I mean? So like elite performance is substantially different from elite health. And by the way, how did the 4,000 calorie diet go? And did you equate for the thermogenic effect of meat?
Yeah. So the thermic effect of a strict carnivore is actually not that high. Because when you start taking into account the fact that it's roughly 70% fat and you have no carbohydrates, because that's the first thing everybody says. Oh, it's the protein. I'm like, yeah, there's more protein, but the thermic effect of fat is between 0 and 3%.
Yeah.
Right. So it's virtually non-existent. So you are only doing protein. So when you start to account for the fact that a standard American diet is 50% carbs and you're still getting, 20% protein, you now have, carbs, you're 5 to 10% in your thermic effect. And I'm eating 500 grams. So the thermic effect actually came out almost exactly. Huh. Now there's studies to show that when protein is the most important one to equate regardless from the thermic, whatever, right? Like we're talking minuscule. Yeah. But yeah, I lost weight eating 4,000 calories of carnivore and gained weight eating 4,000 calories standard American. Now, obviously there was some water in there, but based on trends after the first week, it's easy to see where it's going. And that's my whole pitch. Like, it's the food that you eat. Yes, the energy matters, right? Yes, your intake matters, but we want to equate this down to, it's just all about your calories. Just count your calories. Well, guess what? The type of food that I eat is going to affect everything down the equation that I can't account for, right? I can't account for the bioavailability of it. I can't account for precisely what my thermic effect is going to be. I can't account for any changes in my metabolic advantage, right? Like there's studies out there showing the lower your carbs go down, the more metabolically inefficient you are, which means you just burn more calories by living, right? I also can't account for the energy that I'm excreting.
Which is minimal on carnivore. It's bioavailable.
Yes, but you'll actually start excreting ketones, right? Which have the same caloric load as glucose. So in the role of weight management, my body's like, this is my number one problem. Like, our bodies are smart. They're complex, right? It's not a slot machine. It's not, hey, 25 cents gains you a pound, and if I put in 50 cents, I'm going to gain 2 pounds. No, my body goes, hey, how can I get rid of this? Like, I want to maintain homeostasis. I want to maintain a comfortable weight. So how can I get rid of it? Well, I can excrete it through breath, right? I can breathe out ketones. I can shit it out, right? You can lose up to 10%. You can excrete up to 10% of your energy intake via urination and defecation, right? Can I raise the inefficiency of my system in order to burn, AKA waste, these extra calories? So there's so many complex variables that go into it that it just drives me nuts when they're like, oh yeah, it's literally an equation, right? The change of the work in the system is, like the change in the energy of the system is the work done by the system. And like, come on, like we're not a closed system steam engine. There's a lot more moving parts to it than, X equals A minus B.
So the calorie in, calorie out argument, I mean, and I know bupkis about nutrition compared to really, really good guys. And I've been, I grew up on the zone diet, you know what I mean? And I was weighing all my food in college, a college baseball player weighing all my food. I was nuts about this stuff. And I knew calories in, calories out, sure, but source always mattered to me. Source always made a difference. And I remember I had posted about that maybe 2010, 2011, something like that. And the Seco guys all jumped on me. And they're like, oh, the insulin fairy is going to get you. Like, listen, like, if you don't think it matters, do me a favor. Consume all your protein as just whey protein shakes, all your carbohydrates as just maltodextrin, all your fat as Crisco. And, oh, well, you're not equating for fiber. All right, then take some fucking psyllium husk too. And take a multivitamin. Tell me how you fucking feel. Don't tell me the source doesn't matter. It fucking matters. It absolutely matters.
Well, there's a reason when you go on a cut to get ready for a bodybuilding show, you go clean, right? Like, there's a reason. And the problem with calories in, calories out is there's always a fallback, right? Oh, well, that's equated in the calories out. Okay, well, that's fine, right? The only thing thermodynamics cares about is this overarching view that you're not destroying or creating energy. That's all. That's literally all thermodynamics cares about. What happens to it, whether it gets wasted, whether it gets excreted, whether it gets stored, thermodynamics doesn't care. So, yeah, sure, you can equate everything to calories in, calories out, but it's a post hoc explanation, not even explanation, it's a post hoc summarization of what happened. You can't tell me what a calorie deficit is until you've done it. Yeah. Did you lose weight? Calorie deficit. Did you gain weight? Calorie surplus. Okay, now predict it. Okay, if you've done it before, or if you go extreme enough, sure, if you eat 500 calories a day, you're probably going to lose weight. That's a good way to predict a calorie deficit. But we're not hooked up to indirect calorimetry, right? Nobody knows their actual basal metabolic rate. Nobody knows what they burn during the day. Your smartwatch ain't doing it. Nobody knows what you're actually intaking every day. So it's all just a crapshoot. And to top it all off, the FDA is a 20% margin of error plus or minus on their calories.
Bro.
So why are we even talking about this?
Like, come on. Dude, I had, and so you ready for this? The same 20% margin of error is there for glucose monitors as well. The same exact thing. So years ago, when ketogenic diet first started was the latest, greatest craze. I was like, okay, cool, let me try it. So I bought a blood ketone monitor. Pricking my finger, but it also doubled as a glucose monitor. So I did the ketogenic diet all wrong. I was in a calorie surplus. I felt like shit. I was like, yeah, this isn't it. Like, this can't be right. And then later on, as people were doing it more, and like, no, you need to be in a deficit. Like, oh, stupid me. But I said, you know what? Let me just check my blood sugar. So blood sugar, pricked it, 140. I was like, ooh, okay. Well, let me do it fasted tomorrow morning, 140. I was like, Houston, we may have a problem. So I went on a strict diet, cleaned it all out. I was meditating, doing cardio, doing everything, lost 15 pounds, 140, 140, 120, 120. I'm like, holy shit. Like, I may have diabetes. What? I'm pre-diabetic. This is insane. What the? How am I fasted? I haven't eaten for 3 days. It's 120. Something's fucking wrong. So I bought a new unit and it was saying like 68, 70. And then I researched everything. I was like, yeah, be kidding me, bro. And that's like a 20% difference between 120 and 80. Like, what? That's if you're 100, you know what I mean? Like, shit.
Yeah, it's like we get, and I have one of those. I have a Keto Mojo, but I've also tested it against lab work, and I'm like, it's always within 1 to 2 points. So, but I don't test that often because that's the other thing, right? Going back to blood work, outside of an HbA1c, everything is in the moment, right? Like,
Yes. Yeah.
So people will tell you that you don't have to be fasted for cholesterol, for a blood lipid panel, except it will fuck your triglycerides up, right? Yeah. So I can go in there and have, my LDL and my HDL, and all of a sudden my triglycerides are through the roof. And you got a cardiologist your total cholesterol high, let's get you on a statin. Yeah. It doesn't ask you, did you have 6 Big Macs, an hour before you took this test, right? Because you don't have to be fasted. So it's like, there's so many things, and you can go back a week later and get tested and it's completely different. Like, come on. Like, there has to be, I love information. I'm a, a data nerd. Like, I'm a spreadsheet guy, but at some point, like, we have to like take a step back and be like, okay, could there be other factors that might be influencing? Like, is your machine wrong?
Right. Dude. So I'm Brooker, talk.
Oh, no, go, because you're in the absolute flow, and I'm sorry that I interrupted. Go.
So I'm with you more on the sugar being an issue than most of the things. And another thing that kind of twisted my arm this way was there's an elite track coach that was talking about what they monitor for diets. He says, honestly, the biggest thing that we monitor with these guys is their insulin, their blood sugar, because when that comes up and goes down, that crushes these guys. Like a high fat meal, not so much. You get a high sugar meal and you do that routinely, these guys are toast. It's you're up, you're down, you're up, you're down. And one of the best things that I do for my guys is if they so choose to have any diet modifications, like I have guys that are freaks. One of my guys at one point was one of the fastest guys was the fastest guy in the NFL. And like, he loves sugar cookies and he drinks wine with his wife. You know what I mean? Like, so
did you see the report about the NFL and Uncrustables?
No.
700,000 a year the NFL goes through. The NFL players in the NFL eat 700,000 Uncrustables a year. And the Denver Broncos were the worst, and they ate like 80,000 a year. Like, don't talk to me about diets for athletes. Like, stop.
One of the best players in the NHL drinks 2 cans of Coke in the shift period, in between first and second shift. 2 cans of Coke.
Right? Like, that's the thing. Like, people bring that argument all the time. Like, show me elite athletes that are carnivore. And you're like, okay, well, there are a couple. Top 10 decathlete in the United States is a carnivore. Ran a 10-300. Right? So you there goes the power argument. Like, you can't do. Now, is it good for everybody? No, I'm not saying that. However, there are elite athletes, right? There's professional rugby players. I was talking to Sean Baker, and there's a guy in the 400 that's transferred to carnivore. It's popular in ultra endurance running, like all of this stuff. So that's the number one argument, right? Like, well, show me an elite bodybuilder. Show me one of those that actually cares about their health. I've been an athlete, right? Like, I got to talk to you about this because I was a college baseball player too. I didn't give 2 shits about my diet. When I was a junior in college, I was late for a game and I was like, man, I just got to go get something to eat. So I went to McDonald's, right? And got like their breakfast burrito and an egg McMuffin and a hash brown and had one of the best games of my life. Guess what I did every single game until I graduated. My degree is in sports medicine. I knew exactly what I was doing. I didn't care. Like, I'm sorry, nobody really cares. The average age of a professional athlete is, depending on your sport, between like 24 and 28. 24 to 28-year-olds are going to do the exact same thing that got them there. And guess what? You know, there's a couple freaks. There's the Derrick Henrys of the world, right? And that's why they can play into their 30s. But don't do, like, you've got bodybuilders out there taking exogenous insulin, just absolutely, you know, toying with health in order to get super physiological results. It's not about health. Like, so we should not look to what a professional athlete does to give recommendations for the average person.
Now, one thing, listen, the long distance running makes total sense. It's ketogenic. You know, it's easy, lower heart rate, the power even. I can get on board with power. It's the shift between fast to slow and you have to do multiple rounds of it, where I've noticed that it just, at least for me, and that's why if something doesn't work for me, I feel shitty recommending it to anyone, because it's like, how, especially like this is the only test subject I know. You know what I mean? So it's the athlete side of things. Baseball, you could get away with it, no doubt. You're a baseball player, you could be a fucking carnivore all day long. NFL, man, I don't know. It depends on position. These guys will lose way too much weight. They'll get weight. Linemen, fuck no, can't happen. They tried doing some ketogenic linemen. Some linemen like the ketogenic diet. That was a little thing about 5 years ago. I don't know too many people that do it now. They're doing the fucking vegan thing, which drives me nuts. That's catchy. And there's research that suggests that when they even equated for amino acids, that whey protein was superior to any kind of plant protein. Is that correct?
There's a bunch of different, but again, that's the thing. You can find studies that show. Here's the problem with all of this, right? We can do randomized control trials, but at the end of the day, you have different people doing different things, right? So I can take an athlete and put them on a vegan diet, and they might do okay, right? I can take an athlete, put them on carnivore, and they might do okay. You switch that, and they might not do okay. And so when we have these randomized control trials, randomized control trials are fantastic. However, we still have a bunch of individuals who are all going to be slightly different. And so this is what I say all the time, until we start cloning people and locking them in metabolic wards, you're never going to know for sure.